Hey there, my name's Curtis Lucas and you're watching Empire Building. So now that we've had the entire evening and morning for things to flush out, the market seems to have responded with a resounding crash. And in this market, we're now witnessing the massive amounts of hopelessness and despair and anger. Elon sure does like to kick the hornet's nest from time to time. Now, I'm not going to really succumb to all the conspiracy theories. There's a whole lot of people with all kinds of theories. But what I've found when it comes to Elon Musk is he generally doesn't play that game. Not in my opinion anyways. He's just not really that kind of guy. He does tend to simply say what he thinks. So I've learned simply to take him at his word. But what I wanted to talk about in this video wasn't Elon Musk. It's to actually deal with this question head on. Does Bitcoin mining consume too much energy? And how much of a problem is non-renewable power sources like coal in the creation and verification of transactions on the Bitcoin network? Because there is a lot of misinformation that gets spread about these topics. But before we get on with this video, I just want to remind everybody to keep an eye out and beware of scams down in the comment section, as well as impersonators. And I haven't mentioned this in quite a while, but I still have a link down below in the description for anybody who wants to sign up for a Webull account for commission-free trading. You'll get rewarded with free stock, so it's a pretty good deal. But now let's get on with the video.
First of all, they confuse energy production with energy consumption and see the two as equivalent. This would be the same as saying that electric cars harm the environment because they use more energy in total than gasoline cars. But that's ignoring the side effects of concentrating production of energy and regulating it, as well as distributing the consumption in that way. Obviously, the distribution of gas and oil is much more harmful to the environment, and theoretically at least, if you're producing the electricity for your Teslas with coal-fired power plants, they're more damaging to the environment. You don't hear them saying this argument, however, because it is much easier to regulate the production of energy in one place at the electricity plant than regulate the emissions of 1 billion vehicles that are distributed all around the place. So if you shift the emissions from the endpoint to the source, you've achieved a great deal of environmental impact. These are fundamental concepts in understanding that energy consumption is not the same as pollution.
I thought I'd actually start with this video from Andreas Antonopoulos that he actually uploaded not that long ago. In fact, only about a month ago. So it's ironic that he mentions Tesla and electric vehicles in forming his argument about the effectiveness or the carbon footprint of different economic systems. So in light of what Elon Musk is stating in terms of the issue that he takes with Bitcoin's carbon footprint, it is ironic when he himself, with like Tesla's now vast fleet of vehicles that are all around the world, not all of those vehicles are charged or powered from sources that are clean. Some of these provinces, states, countries all around the world source their power from coal. That doesn't make electric vehicles a bad thing. And certainly, as far as power consumption goes and the rising consumption that Bitcoin is utilizing, this also is not a bad thing. That would be like saying that, oh, the amount of energy consumption that electric vehicles are consuming has been increasing exponentially. This must be a bad thing, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I understand why everybody is so frustrated. Somebody as intelligent as Elon Musk can't seem to connect these dots. And it leads people to believe that perhaps he has some sort of ulterior motive. Honestly, what I do think here is that he hasn't spent enough time studying this. I mean, you can't really blame the guy. I mean, yes, he's a very intelligent person, but nobody is an expert in everything, not even Elon Musk. I mean, how much time do you really expect him to spend on studying Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies when, he's running two of the most advanced companies the world has ever seen? Sending rockets into space, developing Starship, building out Tesla. These things are going to take a large majority of his mental headspace. Not to mention Twitter. He's got to make time for that too. So I'm not giving him a pass. What he did, in my opinion, was reckless. He should at least know when he's studied a topic in depth enough. But he's getting his education now. But it's at the expense of all of us. Unfortunately, he is a very instrumental figure in this space now. But when it comes to understanding the technicalities, I'll take my cues from Andreas Antonopoulos. So we're going to review a little bit more of what he had to say on this topic.
But if you want to bash Bitcoin because you don't see it as useful or you disagree with its political message, then no amount of argumentation is going to shift that perspective. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep focusing on what matters. The truth of the matter is that because Bitcoin mining can happen anywhere and does not require a specific location, Bitcoin mining is attracted to renewable energy and waste energy, energy that either cannot be distributed or cannot be used in a cost-effective manner because it is remote. Things like off-flaring of gas, hydro that exceeds local demand, or other renewable forms of energy that exceed local demand and do not have distribution mechanisms. In the end, Bitcoin subsidizes renewable energy. But that argument won't get you very far if the people are not interested in good faith arguments, but are interested simply in finding yet another way to bash Bitcoin. Just ignore it. Just ignore it. You don't want pollution and carbon dioxide? Great. Regulate energy production. If you're worried about pollution, regulate energy production. One of the best ways to do that is, in my opinion, with carbon credit markets, but those are not very popular.
So, yeah, these are the kinds of thoughtful arguments that somebody who has actually studied this in great detail might form. He's absolutely right that if you're trying to convince somebody who already doesn't like Bitcoin, these won't get you anywhere. But someone like Elon Musk does believe in it. I just think he needs to spend some time, and it's not even that hard. I don't think it's going to take him very long. However, I think that he's done some damage to his reputation as far as a credible source, which in the end might not actually be a bad thing. Like I said, I think it's ridiculous that one person can have this much of an impact on this market. I think it's apparent that as time goes on, Elon Musk is going to have less and less ability to impact things in this manner because people will stop listening to him, frankly, at least until he educates himself. I'm sorry to say it. But let's keep going into this because Andreas has even more things that he's covered over the years. And there's one other video that shares some very insightful points of view.
First of all, people say it's a waste to use that energy, which is a subjective perspective. It's like it's a waste to you, but obviously the people who are using that energy and actually paying for it, for them it's not a waste. They call it an investment. And so what you're trying to say is, I'm going to substitute my decision of what a market should do for that market. And there's a dangerous path there, because what we're talking about is not energy generation, we're talking about energy consumption, which are two very different things. Energy isn't a bad thing. Energy produced from polluting sources is a bad thing. But consumption of energy from solar is a wonderful thing. You just invested in all of these solar panels that can be used for other purposes. You reduced the unit cost of solar energy. That's magnanimously wonderful.
So this is another very important argument and observation that the expansion of Bitcoin mining and the increased demand on clean energy is going to bring down the cost of those technologies, thus accelerating the advent of clean energy, which also happens to be Tesla's model, Tesla's main goal.
So it matters where that energy is coming from, and if we have a problem with where that energy is coming from, let's address that problem, which is, let's start deciding that some forms of energy production are harmful and some are not. That means taking the externalities of carbon and pricing them, right? Which, depending on how your political leanings lie, is either the worst form of communism or it's the libertarian solution of creating markets for carbon. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is, if the problem is carbon and climate change, address the problem, not Bitcoin.
Now I live in Alberta, and for those of you who don't know, Alberta has a very passionate stance against the proposal of carbon taxes. It's extremely unpopular. Me personally, I actually don't have an issue with it. I think it is a very useful tool for encouraging the adoption and the phasing out of these older technologies in favor of the newer, cleaner technologies in order to bring those costs down. The more those are adopted, the lower the cost of those will become. One day becoming far cheaper than the carbon alternatives that we've become so accustomed to. But one way or another, this is going to happen. Carbon tax or no carbon tax. Because the fact of the matter is, with increased adoption, those cost curves come way down. It will just make sense to use renewable alternatives. So no matter what, that's where we're headed.
Because it's a bit ironic to say that this form of energy consumption, which I'm not using, is wasteful. But Christmas lights are pretty. Christmas lights actually consume a significant percentage of US energy every year. For what? For what? As that, I remember this funny movie where the guy finally builds his entire thing and he takes these two very high voltage cables and he goes, and the whole neighborhood lights up, and then the camera zooms out, and there's this guy on the ISS, and like, what's that? They can see the house from space. Americans do this every year, right? And okay, maybe Christmas is sacred and we shouldn't really bash Christmas because the lights are pretty. I have a few other ones for you. How about war? How about the greatest polluter on the planet is the US Department of Defense, by far? How about capitalism? How about all of the amount of junk we dump into rivers in order to extract cobalt for your fancy iPhone, or lithium, or gold, or all of the other things that we're doing to our planet? So we have to decide, are we going to start prescribing to markets what is good and what is bad use of energy? And the problem is, the real problem is, at that point, who decides? I'm not even going to go to the fact that printing and shipping and guarding paper money and handling the data fraud implications of credit cards consume a far greater amount of energy than Bitcoin, and at the same time eat away at our democracy. I'm not even going to go there. The real problem is who decides. If you say this use of energy is bad, this use of energy is good, you're a dictator. That's a decision that markets should make. For the person consuming the energy, it's all good. Now, if you want to tell me that there are externalities that have not been accounted for in the price and the market isn't working, great. Let's price those externalities. Let's bill for carbon.
On the topic of Christmas lights, I thought I'd do a little bit of searching onto this, found this article from 2015, so it's actually highly unlikely this has anything to do or was written for the purposes of Bitcoin. This was simply pointing out how much energy actually gets used by Christmas lights. American household Christmas lights, a favorite holiday tradition, use up more electricity than some poorer countries, such as El Salvador or Ethiopia, do in a year. And this is just the United States. We're not talking about globally. So without going into this in insane detail, the point here is uses of energy is, in terms of whatever it is accomplishing, it's entirely subjective. The thing is that Bitcoin's an easy target because everything is open and transparent. It's very easy to point at Bitcoin and see exactly how much it utilizes. It's very hard to do the math on something like the fiat paper system. Once you're accounting for armored trucks and these actual printing presses and the banks and the towers and the people who are employed by those banks and the transportation of them moving to and from work and around the world and around the globe flights, all of the fuel and carbon that's burned for them to operate that system. You have to account for it all. Not very easy to do. Very easy to point at Bitcoin. And the fact of the matter is, as I pointed out in yesterday's video, Bitcoin already utilizes 76% of natural renewable power sources. So I really don't think it's the one contributing to this problem in any significant way. But also further to his other point is, in the end, these are free open markets, and they will naturally evolve to their most efficient manner. If governments of the world really don't want dirty energy being used by Bitcoining, but they're okay with it being used for Christmas lights or anything else, it would seem the real problem is that dirty energy. So do something about that. You can't dictate what the free market decides to use that power for.
In which case, Bitcoin mining, as the most fungible and transportable form of consumption, would immediately migrate to the low-cost alternatives. And at that point, what you're doing is you're using energy that would otherwise be wasted. You're scavenging waste energy that cannot be transported effectively to other locations. And in doing so, especially in alternative forms of energy, what you're doing is you're depreciating the capital cost of building that plant in the first place. So you put a bunch of solar here, and you say, I have a bunch of solar that delivers 15 megawatts, but there's a small community that only needs 5 megawatts. So it's going to take me 5 years to pay for that by sending it to this community. I can't ship it too far because it gets all lost in the high voltage cables. And then some guy comes along and says, I'm going to park 5 Bitcoin miners right next to you, 5,000, 500,000 Bitcoin miners right next to you. We're going to plug them in. We're going to use all 15 megawatts right now, and we will pay for this plant in a year. What do? You build 2 plants. And then you build 3 plants. And now we're stopping burning dinosaurs. We're no longer burning fossil fuels because the least transportable energy that is least matched with demand is alternative energy. So before you go blaming Bitcoin mining for the end of civilization, do the math properly, at least.
So this, for me, is one of the most important parts of this argument. If it wasn't for Bitcoin, a lot of the world's unspent power capacity, we're talking about hydroelectric dams that have to let most of the water flow through the dam without passing through the turbines. That's wasted energy. They have to let it through because they can only hold so much in their reservoir. But as they do so, it expels the energy through that potential drop in gravity, but it's not collected and not utilized and not profited from, which actually makes the operating cost of those facilities even higher. Bitcoin solves this problem because it is completely portable. It can be set up anywhere. These Bitcoin miners are scouring the globe to find every watt of this unspent power, and they're going to find a way to utilize it. This is called arbitrage, and the effect in doing so encourages the development of even more clean power sources. This is going to accelerate the adoption of these technologies.
Because the other problem you have is the extrapolation. We are using this much energy for Bitcoin. It has this many transactions. Divide the amount of energy by the number of the transactions. Therefore, if Bitcoin grows by this much, we will use bullshit. That's not the real math. That's not a valid extrapolation. The amount of energy used in mining has no bearing on the number of transactions you can process. That is exactly the same math as saying, my 14-year-old has grown 4 inches so far this year. By the time he's 25, he will be 45 feet tall. That kind of shoddy math just got published in Forbes, Bloomberg, CNN, CNBC, all over the place, with gloating, gleeful analysts going, see, I told you Bitcoin is going to destroy the planet. And there's one last thing I'd like to say. They said the same thing about the internet. A lot of the things they say about Bitcoin, they said the same things about the internet. A haven of terrorists, pornographers, and pedophiles, of course, but also they went and did the math. They're like, Google uses X many data centers to process X many search queries. Therefore, by the year 2020, the internet will consume 30% of US energy. The actual percentage has now dropped to less than 2%, and it's delivered a level of productivity and life improvement for us that far, far outweighs that consumption of energy. They did the math wrong. Or they lied in order to make sure that their parasitic bosses could keep sucking on that central pipe.
So there you have it. If nothing else, Elon Musk has brought this conversation to the forefront so we can finally deal with it once and for all. And it's also interesting that on this note of energy usage per transaction is the same pitfall that Elon Musk fell for. He says we are also looking at other cryptocurrencies that use less than 1% of Bitcoin's energy per transaction. Bitcoin does not spend energy for every transaction it processes. The energy that it expends goes towards securing the blockchain, making it more and more secure. It has nothing to do with the amount of transactions that it can process or how much energy each one of those transactions take. Something as important as Bitcoin, if you think it is important, requires a significant amount of energy to secure it, to make it safe to use. And if the free market cannot regulate or self-regulate that, then we have a problem. And Bitcoin won't function the way it was intended to. I've also heard it said that maybe he's just spreading this around because then he could swoop in. I believe it was Anthony Pompliano who got on CNBC this morning and claimed that perhaps he was just going to try and swoop in, save the day, and allow Teslas to begin mining for Bitcoin in a very decentralized manner. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, or if Tesla's going to take a serious look at solving this problem. That would be great if he did that. I don't think that there is an ulterior motive in terms of what he had intended. Like if there's some evil genius plan here. What I know about the guy, it doesn't seem to fit. But everybody's welcome to sort of impart their own viewpoint on that. Fill your boots. But in the end, as time goes on, all this gets washed out. And when we're talking, months and years down the road, you can look back at the chart during this time, and most people will even forget what it was that caused this dip in the first place. It just gets lost in the ether. When you go back in time to moments like this, how many people actually remember what caused this dip? I sure don't. I can't be absolutely sure, but I wasn't really that closely involved at this time. Anyone else that remembers offhand exactly what caused the dip in Bitcoin from $4,300 down to $3,000? Go ahead and share with us in the comments. But that's basically what happened here today. And then we can plainly see what happened next. So I'm not worried. These things will flush themselves out. And this kind of fear in a market gives every institution and anyone who really understands this all the opportunities they were looking for. I have no doubt in my mind that within a few months, things will be looking very, very different. And all of this anxiety that we're feeling, it's going to pass. The important thing is not to let the extreme high level of emotion that's out there influence your decisions. If you think this tweet was enough to kill Bitcoin, probably shouldn't have been invested in this in the first place. Otherwise, you're like Peter Schiff, who once again called for the death of Bitcoin. What he had to say was Bitcoin may have been the fastest horse in the race, but it looks like it just broke its leg. When a racehorse breaks its leg, the tradition is to shoot it. Bitcoin is about to get taken behind the barn and shot. Peter Schiff is famous for calling bottoms, and I have no doubt this will just be another one of those times. And that's all for this one. Now let's get back to empire building.